People, and especially young people, would not always be wrong to see education as a dirty word. In general, both in Europe and America and elsewhere too, especially East Asia, education is something that's often done to young people, to pass tests, to sort them, and as a result brings about higher or often lower levels of self-regard, and with it, agitation about one's place in the world. Schooling is not practiced generally as something discovery-based, involving skills you can learn in the authentic, real-life context, such as repairing a laptop, growing plants on a plot of land, or some other skill practiced in the environment in which you'll eventually practice them in the future. Elon Musk has been fond of using the analogy of the video game to describe a student going at their own speed through learning.
Generally, you want education to be like as close to a video game as possible, like a good video game. So if you can make it interactive and engaging, then you can make education far more compelling.
But this is not a new idea, though, in many ways very different from Musk. Ideas about discovery-based learning go back at least to Jerome Bruner in the 1960s.
The kind of learning that they're doing now is of a kind that they can use, that they're getting it in a way that'll stick to their bones, if you will.
What Musk, and perhaps to a lesser extent Bruner, implicitly describe as being positive about this kind of learning is that it can induce flow states, as coined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Performing at our peak or stretching beyond our former limits can motivate and energize us to keep practicing. When there is too little demand, people get bored. If there's too much for them to handle, they get anxious. Who can say that they do not remember school being, at least in part, long hours of boredom shot through by moments of high anxiety? In this space of self-guided discovery, in the most recent part of my lifetime, a new model of education has risen up on the internet, not just entertainment sites like YouTube, but on other platforms that make more of a promise to untether learning from schooling and higher education. Sites like Skillshare and Meetup show off a model where anyone can learn the skills for almost anything, from Adobe Elements to playing the lute. Within Britain and the EU, these currently exist for the most part almost entirely outside of and apart from our systems of public education and training. They are a niche market, an extracurricular activity, a recreational pastime. But could that be about to change? Most schools here cannot procure them, at least not in a GDPR-compliant way with their current model, but perhaps some schools will try anyway. In 1971, a radical Catholic priest known as Ivan Illich, known at that moment mostly in a limited way in educational circles with his association with the progressive educational theorist Everett Reimer, turned the tables on the conventional discussions of education reform. He argued that instead of trying to improve the systems of compulsory schooling with new technology or innovative teaching strategies, it would be preferable to scrap mass education altogether. Instead, he thought about decentralized arrangements involving what he called learning webs, peer matching systems, skill exchanges, and other resources for a more liberated learning and free inquiry. This came in part from a viewpoint that was deeply Christian, but it was also deeply critical, both of modernity and capitalism too. Although Illich never referred to himself as an anarchist in print, he was closely associated with major figures in left anarchist circles like Paul Goodman and John Holt. Over 40 years later, Illich is gone. Much of the same old education reform discussion persists. He lived to see the 90s .com bubble and some of what the internet would become up until 2002. But Illich's vision is on its way to being realized in the 21st century, not by education professionals within the education reform movement or even young idealists, but by startups and some of the largest companies in the world. More on that in a couple of minutes. The existing platforms seek to disrupt the traditional models of schooling, but they do not necessarily follow Illich's vision. Illich's vision of future learning can be seen in the practice in the activities facilitated by companies like Meetup. This is a model that shows off Illich's proposed peer matching system built on a communications network which permits persons to describe the learning activity in which they wish to engage, in the hope of finding a partner for the inquiry. Now, there's also Skillshare, which I'm sure you've seen sponsored by a great many people on YouTube. This offers a robust version of both Illich's ideas for skill exchanges, which permit persons to list their skills and the conditions under which they're willing to serve as models for others who want to learn these skills, and for what he called reference services to educators at large. Now, these are people who can be listed in a directory, giving the self-descriptions of professionals, paraprofessionals, and freelancers, along with conditions of access to their services, and who could be chosen by polling or consulting their former clients. I myself was hired as a freelancer to make this video. Illich was among a few prescient people who understood the power that the internet would play in the rapid exchange of learning and ideas, although he spoke about it differently from how science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke spoke about it.
These things will make possible a world in which we can be in instant contact with each other, wherever we may be, where we can contact our friends anywhere on Earth, even if we don't know their actual physical location.
Clarke's vision of the future, depicted in Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey with long-distance video calls and tablets, was probably a bit more prescient. Illich spoke of it in terms of computers with typewriter terminals, return mail, bulletin boards, and newspaper classified ads, the analog technology of the past. New partnerships between the ostensibly public education system in the US and private players like Facebook, and between private to private companies too, are creating some unnerving directions for education. This should seem curious and give us pause for thought. What does Facebook want to do with education? And as we'll hopefully see, because of the problem of vested interests that come along with the powerful creating a model of education that serve their interests, these new directions for education have their own pitfalls. They do not necessarily represent the scientifically highest standards of educating, but instead exist to increase shareholder value. Let's go through some examples. It was reported by EdSurge in autumn 2021 that Facebook will partner with Coursera and edX to help push Meta's curriculum in augmented and virtual reality. edX, which was started as a non-profit by Harvard and MIT, is in the process of being sold to for-profit 2U. Whether or not it was destined that online learning platforms, massive open online courses, MOOCs or MOOCs, or an online platform management would try to relocate education to some virtual reality freed from physical infrastructure with tokens for micro-credentials. Most people could be forgiven for not seeing Facebook becoming that virtual infrastructure of learning. There have been hints Facebook would go for education from around 2018 onwards, such as its Facebook for Education scheme. Though despite the guiding principle of enabling learning communities in marketing, it appears fairly lacking in actuality. There is also another Facebook guide for education from 2013, based on intensive workshops and immersion sessions at Facebook HQ, looking at the challenges and opportunities of using Facebook in the classroom. This did not exactly take off either. The more recent Zuckerberg initiative is a real step in a more active direction. It's not exactly Facebook in schools, but Facebook engineers were directed away from their usual Facebook duties to build a personalized learning platform for Summit Schools charter chain. In spite of student and parent protests in New York, Summit not only has a charter chain running on Facebook engineering, but also sells the platform across the United States. The American National Education Policy Center found no evidence to support the science-based, personalized learning platform model from Summit, despite its claims. The Zuckerberg initiative, with its education technology program, seeks to apply engineering expertise through its partnership with Gradient Learning to education. They recently released its own EdTech product, Along, which is a bit like a counseling or therapy service accessed online. According to Ben Williamson, a researcher into digital education, the CZI is a huge philanthropic capitalist hybrid of a foundation and low-tax investment vehicle, favoring ideas about learning engineering and datafication of schools. It typifies Silicon Valley philanthropy and its tech reformatory aims. While I didn't do too much digging into the tax structure of the foundation, it raises some eyebrows. So, Facebook, or now Meta, the parent company looking to put education into its metaverse, is not quite new. It's part of a history of both failures and private attempts to control large chunks of public education. Overall, though, perhaps widespread opposition both to private players in public schooling, as well as the scientific claims of how much better this kind of learning is, as well as the costs involved of virtual reality and energy scarcity in the coming decades to power the metaverse, could mean Meta's ambitious projects for virtual reality in education and workplace collaboration will not really see the light of an artificial day. Funnily enough, it was Jerome Bruner who was a great popularizer of the phrase going meta. He said, "The existence of a story as a form is a perpetual guarantee that humankind will go meta on received versions of reality," to indicate, as he said, as a reflexive way people can use stories to surpass their received versions of reality. More than this video also sought to show how any decentralized model of education will always have to contend with the very real question of how do you confront and perhaps build an alternative model around the money and the power of vested interests. It didn't do enough digging into Skillshare or Meetup, though this may be for another video. One glaring omission of virtual reality-assisted learning is that it's not about practicing skills in their authentic contexts. It's about using big tech services. Thanks very, very much for watching.
With many thanks to Dr. Ben Williamson, and also Research and Develop blog, and thanks to you. Thank you for watching.